I think it's really important that they really know who they are so well that then they can know how to step into a leadership role. So I'm very big on challenging them, not being hard on them necessarily, but challenging them. If they say something that's a blanket belief, and challenging, well, is that really true? Like, go and research it, get the correct information to give them the resources, so that the truth of being a leader, the first step is to know yourself really well. And then you can step into a leadership role. If you don't know yourself and you step into a leadership role, then you're just kind of regurgitating what everyone's telling you, and you're not really acting as a leader.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from honestypill.com. You're listening to episode 31 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to people who are breaking the status quo, ditching outdated traditions, and building a better future for themselves and the people they work with. I'll be connecting you with musicians, coaches, hip-hop artists, actors, sound healers, and people who not only inspire and educate every single day, but who are experts at talking about what they do so you can get inspired in your own work. My guest today is transformational voice coach, singer, pianist, musician, composer, author, multi-instrumentalist, and teacher, Helane Marie Anderson. Whoa, that is a lot of credentials. And for those of you who have been listening to the podcast for a while and were wondering, what is a sound healer that I always mention in the intro, you're going to find out exactly what that is and why you need to know about it in today's episode. Helane has had an incredibly varied career doing all sorts of things I just mentioned, including being praised in LA Magazine as a healer who sings like an angel, taking you into the celestial world with her voice paired with crystal singing bowls, chimes, and alchemical bowls. And if you didn't understand what I just said, stay tuned because Helane's going to explain all of that, even give you a totally mind-blowing demonstration right here on the podcast. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Celestial world, singing bowls, sound healing. This is not for me. I have real problems to deal with, like practicing my instrument or getting my kids out the door to school on time. But hang on, I think you're going to find out that what Helane has to say will not only totally connect with you if you listen, but might even make all of those to-do lists even easier to finish, productive, and even joyful. All right, grab your yoga mat and sound bowls. Here it comes. All right, everybody, this is the episode I've been talking about. Helane Marie Anderson, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the Honesty Pill podcast.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm happy to be here with you, Chris.
So we have so much we can talk about and so many directions we could go, but actually I want to jump right to usually something we save to the end for promotion, which is your book called You Are Meant to Sing. And the tagline is, are you ready to take the next steps in finding your true voice and share it with the world? And I want to just start out here. I think I speak for 98% of the people listening. When they hear an invitation or the sentence, everyone can sing, the first thing they do is say, well, yeah, but not me. I sing in the shower. I sing while I'm driving. You know, there's no way most people would be ready to embrace that. And I think it's probably a great place to start. What sort of reaction are you getting from a title of a book like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of closet singers in the world, people that like to sing in the shower, people that like to sing in the car when no one else is listening. And most people are very quick, unless they deem themselves a singer, they are very quick to say, I'm not a singer. And then when I ask them if they sing by themselves or they sing in these other locations, everyone pretty much says, yeah, I do, but I don't want anyone to hear me. And what's really interesting, and this is the example I always tell people, is that in indigenous cultures, everybody sang. It was not about the quality of your voice, whether or not you actually sang. And so the thing with the voice is that it is our soul imprint. It's like the thing that we are the most communicative with, right? It's like what we use to speak, to communicate to people. And when you work with the vibration of the voice with singing and with your body, and you're actually in that resonance, whether you deem yourself a singer or not is sort of immaterial. It's actually the power of your voice is like what creates change in your life. It's how you can manifest things. It's how you can help people. It's how you can do all these various different things. So yes, there are going to always be people that are more gifted at singing naturally, or their instrument is for that purpose, but it doesn't matter if that is for your purpose or not. And then the other interesting reaction that I get also is a lot of people who are afraid to sing, but they actually really like to sing, but they know they can get better. And so I've worked with a lot of adults and people that really just maybe sang in choir when they were younger and then stopped singing completely and wanted to get back into singing. And it's something that brought them a lot of joy. So it's also tapping back into something for them. And it, ironically or not ironically, it helps all of them in every area of their life when they start actually using the vibration of their voice as a regular practice.
Now, you just said a word that you said the word joy, and that
Yes.
instantly connected me with, oh, there is a group of people who have no hang-ups about this at all and embrace it freely, and that's children. I have a daughter who, my son doesn't sing. You have to coax him out of it. But my daughter will sing and dance for anybody. She will run up to everybody and say, check it out, and start doing a little dog and pony
That was
show.
me.
That was you? So
Yeah.
tell me about that. What were you like growing up as a kid?
My mom used to say I used to just walk up to strangers in the grocery store and ask them if I could sing and dance for them. So yeah, that's pretty much how I was like as a kid.
Where did you grow up? Not in Los Angeles.
No, I was born in Wisconsin, and then when I was 10 years old, we moved to North Carolina. So the Midwest and the South.
Yeah, Wisconsin and the Carolinas are huge entertainment industry areas, aren't they? Not so much.
Yeah, huge. That's that's why I still live there. I'm just kidding. I live in Los Angeles now.
So, yeah, you made your way back here. But I think it's interesting that somewhere along the line, we started to get either shy or judgmental towards ourselves about that expression and cut it off. And I think that starts to cause issues with every sort of form of communication and connection to who we really are. I mean, what happened? What happens to people to make them not want to embrace that natural form of communication?
I mean, honestly, it's really interesting that you asked me that question. Of course, being a classical musician as well, and having a degree in piano and having studied voice also at a master's degree level, it's an interesting thing to reflect upon because personally, which was my experience, and I know a lot of your listeners are also classical musicians or people that are drawn to music, there's a harshness in training in classical music that exists, as a lot of people are aware of this innate perfectionism, where it's very focused on the recreation of things that are other people's vision. And there's very little emphasis in conservatories. Still to this day, it's something that actually I would envision hopefully changing as things unfold. There's a lack of development of individuation of each person's musical voice. And there's a lot of cloning or a lot of do it this way or something. And so I see it as this idea of stepping into your own individual voice by improvising with your instrument outside of the music that you're recreating. And it's something that I encourage, because I do teach an arts leadership class at the USC Thornton School of Music still to this day. And within that class, I do tell people often, I give them the assignment when I meet with each student individually to just improvise with their instrument for 15 minutes a day. And the normal response is sort of that same gut reaction that people have with singing. They're like, oh, well, I sound terrible, or, oh, well, I did this. So like that was also my experience, was less about being shy, but more that I pursued the piano, which I loved, but I also was hiding behind the piano. And I would often say, I'm a pianist who sings. I'm not a singer that plays, and I'd have that differentiation, which for those of you not in the music world, it just is something that people say often because there's sort of a stereotype that singers don't actually understand music at the deeper level, which is actually so not true. It's a very big fallacy in musical joke land. But this idea of cultivating your voice is not even just about singing. It's cultivating your voice in whatever it is that you do and how important that is. But if you use the vibration of your voice that way, you can help differentiate those very self-critical voices, which was my journey, that I became so stuck in a box because actually the music making I was being taught was not the kind of music that my soul wanted to create. And I felt boxed in by, oh, well, this is the only way that music exists in this classical way. And then you go and you teach and you do that. That's one way, but it's not the only way. And so, and I also found, because I still do on occasion sing classical gigs, and when I do, I have found that improvising with my voice has helped my technique rather than hinder it.
Yeah, I have to jump in there because this is such a recurring theme in conversations I've been having lately with percussionists and composers and people who write songs for children. This idea of improvisation. I was just speaking to someone about writing cadenzas. It's basically like improvising and learning how to tapping into the mastery of your instrument in a different sort of a way. And it's not something we're taught how to do. And in fact, I have the same reaction that you outlined a moment ago. It strikes fear in my heart if I'm ever asked to improvise. In fact, talk about hiding behind your piano. At my job, if I see changes in my part, I can literally say, no, I don't do that. It's not my thing. And they have to hire somebody like, a Wayne Bergeron or something to come in and do it. So talk about how the improvisational technique could actually make me a better trumpet player.
For sure. I mean, I think that part of it is that I'll tell you my own process with it, which happened first with piano and second with voice, interestingly enough, is that with the piano, I spent an entire year about 10 years ago improvising every day. And I just forced myself to sit down and play in different keys. And I just pick a key on the day and I'd sit down and I just play whatever came out without trying to judge it. And just seeing like, okay, well, of course I know C major as a pianist, you know C major. Let me just make stuff up and kind of riff on whatever it is. Because at this point, if you study that long, you already have a certain amount of technique, right? Like everyone does. When you get to that level of music, you're able to do scales and arpeggios and things and chromatic scales without really thinking about it very much because you've practiced it and drilled it in. Well, they're the same structural mechanisms and scales for if you practice jazz or if you practice pop music or if you practice all of these other different genres. And so the idea is that in classical music, there's such a rigidity sometimes that it has to be just this one way. And so the idea is that when you sit down, it took me a full year. And by the end of that year, I wrote the first music and song that I'd written in years because it just started to flow. Because out of the improvising, all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's cool. And then as I was improvising, then I would recreate it, have the melody come out as well. And it was just a really powerful experience for me to go through every day. And then every day, the thing about the work that I do with the voice is that it's applicable to any instrument. So like anyone who plays any instrument, like coming and doing the way that I work with people with the voice would help anyone in breaking through what that is. Because I deal with all the internal voices too. Because from that intuitive element of all those judgments and the preconceived notion and all of the other things that are going on in our heads, you have to actually learn how to work with those voices because they're really strong in most musicians. That incredible, mean, self-critical, like, I missed one note on the thing, or I dropped the one note, or it wasn't absolutely perfect, or this could have been better. And there's a beauty to refinement and virtuosity. But there's also a beauty to allowing what happens in the moment to be brilliant on its own. And so, but there's a bridge in between that has to be cultivated. So in the same way, you have to sit down and practice your scales or practice a passage over and over again to get it right and kind of rethink through it and use your mental brain and use your physical mechanism and use, like in your case, like how you would practice your tonguing regularly or like anything else that's like your technicality of it. It's the same thing. It's that you're retraining your brain to think about music in a slightly different way and allow the mechanism flow. So it's and it's hard because you take it from one extreme where you're completely in your head around practicing to allow it to just flow naturally. It becomes a very different experience. And sometimes it can be very helpful to even just put on a recording of some other genre of music you might like and play along with it and just see what comes out and see if you can riff a little bit on like what comes out, if it's jazz or if it's whatever. And jazz is still pretty structured, I mean, it's within the improvisation, it's structured in the same way that cadenzas are structured within sonatas or concertos, right? Like, and so you have that ability. And so it's really just like applying the same level of discipline, because there's not a single person that can call themselves a classical musician that doesn't have discipline, right? I mean, you have to have discipline. So it's applying that same practice of discipline to actually taking down some of the structures and allowing that space. And it's actually quite difficult initially. And it took me, I would say, at least 3 months before I felt entirely comfortable with it.
It's so incredible to hear you say applying discipline to the negative space in our practice. We just don't do it. It doesn't even occur to us to do it, or even if we could figure out how to do it. Something that I discovered recently is, and anybody who has Apple Music or a YouTube channel or anything, are these like house beats that people put out. And it's hip hop, and it's just basically very tonic driven. Harmonic function is very limited, rhythmic, textural experience. And I can play, even if I'm playing trumpet or if I'm playing guitar, which I don't play that well, but I have like permission to experiment because it's not Brahms, it's not bebop, it's just this very static experience. And I don't even know what key I'm playing in sometimes. I'm just reflecting off of what the artist has done. That's been a pretty interesting gateway for me to tap into this vibration of being free. But let's talk about perfectionism. Let's talk about lack of trust. Let's talk about classical musicians being constantly in criticism mode. What would you say is a great way to like break out of that on a very surface level? What's like step number one? If I'm in my practice room and I have a concert coming up, my tendency is going to be wanting to work on the notes, work on the tempos, work on the transitions. How do I let go and get into that flow?
Well, I think it's you have to do both, right? You have to like learn the piece and you have to let it sit. But there's another element that, and this may sound a little strange, but I know that it's helped me and a lot of other people who I've given this instruction to. If you're learning a new piece, kind of really seeing the overarching element of what that music is wanting to be. So it's that first, and seeing kind of the bigger arch of the piece of that, even in your case, like the passage within the context of the orchestral piece as a whole, right? If you're learning an orchestral passage that's very difficult. So you'd want to kind of understand contextually where this fits in, like what's the bigger vision of the composer. And then if you kind of go back then and approach, okay, breaking it down as you would anyway, right? Like, and you know that because you've practiced for years, you break it down the way you would. But then after you break down each passage and you're practicing each little bit on its own and then bringing it together, spend some time at the end of each, even if it's not perfect from the beginning to the end yet, to be able to just play it through with letting the technique go out for a minute and just really connecting with the music. So, for example, and it's interesting, you said this, and I want to come back a little bit to what you said about getting out of your head with the techno music beats. But to answer this question fully about the music itself and what is unfolding when you're doing that, is to allow that expression, even if you slow it way down initially, and just to feel into where the notes are going. And spend a little bit of your practice time each day just like really connecting with the music itself. And so like in instance when I'm teaching about sound healing or working with singing bowls or something, and again, this is the part that might sound kind of strange, but I mean, you could do this with your instrument too, is just be like, hey, like, what's up, piano? Like, we're gonna jam today together. Like, what do you want to express, right? So you actually, and it sounds silly, but it's sort of a way to deal with those negative voices, and it's worked really well for me and other people I've told. It sounds strange, but it's this idea that you just really connect with the instrument and you're like, how do you want to be played, right? Like, when do we ever talk to our instrument and be like, hey?
I was just going to say, I'm doing a world premiere tonight and we're playing Zarathustra right after it. I talk to my trumpets a lot like, okay, please don't let me down. We can do this. Like it's more of a begging than a conversation. No, I mean, I think you're right. I think it is not something we even consider. And I want to talk about that when you finish feeling like you've answered this question fully. But thinking about what the instrument wants is such an unusual way to frame it, or what this piece wants. I often don't think of it that way. I think of it in terms of, what is the notation telling me to do? And can I follow the instruction? And I think right there is an indication of how we don't look at it in the 360 way we could be looking at it.
Yeah, and I mean, like, as you know, my background, I worked with a lot of composers that were living composers, right? And in my experience, I do think composers can be super particular, but I also think that any composer is also open to something sounding even better than what they might have envisioned. So there's like a notation that could be very specific of what they're thinking and their vision, but then there also can be an elevation of your own interpretation upon it, right? And I see it kind of the same way as, like, I mean, look at how many conductors conduct the same piece, and it could be very different piece from one conductor to the next, as you know, right? And so it's that same thing, is that you in that passage, you have your own open interpretation, and whatever your instrument is, you're going to have many different interpretations, and you might have your favorite of somebody that might have played a piece that you knew. So it's like, that's how you allow your own voice to come in the creation of whatever that piece is. In a world premiere, it's also the composer's vision, but they haven't yet heard it in its final form yet either. So there's also that element of like, hey, like, this is what's happening in notation, but when you start to allow your voice to come in, it can elevate what the composer's vision is rather than hinder it or make it have to be exactly what they thought in their head.
This is going to be a very poorly formed thought, but I have to put it out because I just had it for the first time. I can't really control what I'm playing, right? I mean, I have to honor the direction. I mean, sure, a conductor can play with a tempo or an interpretation, but I'm still beholden to what they want to do. But what I can control 100% fully, and what I often never control or rarely control, is how I show up mentally for the piece. Like, what sort of thoughts am I bringing to it? Is it fear? Is it joy? Is it abundance? Is it lack? Am I panicking about it? Am I looking forward to it? That's something that I alone get to control, which is a huge part of the creative experience. That energy is going to transmit to my colleagues. It's going to transmit to the audience. So what a fascinating revelation to have. You just mentioned something about the hip hop beats that you wanted to mention too. I don't want to lose that because it is a really interesting place that I get to when I practice with those.
Well, what's interesting about that is that actually is really interesting, because this is just a follow-up to your question too, about like, what do I do in my own time if I feel like I'm not quite stepping into that space? So I think that exactly what you're doing would be one of those ways too, is to put on something that gets you a little out of your standard way of thinking. And for myself too, when I started doing sound healing more, I on purpose was working very much in the dissonant spaces outside of 440 tunings on purpose, because I felt like it got people out of their head. Because like so much Western music is very in the head and in that experience of the head, and I wanted to get people more in their bodies. And when you challenge the tonality with people, it changes their experience of the vibration of music. And when you're singing anyway, and this is something that's not uncommon because I sang in choirs my whole life growing up too, is this idea of how choirs tend to naturally tune a little lower than 440 if they sing on their own. There's like a natural setting in. I mean, they practice all the time to stay at 440, but in general, there's a natural intonation that tends to go down a little bit in the way the voice naturally wants to sit. And so a lot of sound healing music is tuned at 432 hertz as opposed to 440, because they say it's a more like calming like intonation. So many sound healing instruments now are tuned at 432 hertz. And when I explain this even to my sound students of that versus at 440 hertz and what that means in terms of instruments, you know, it's all like different interpretations, but it's the idea that now that I have kind of broken free of those voices myself, like having gone in this more like dissonant array out of standard toning and standard tuning, and I have now moved where I invited in the harp, and now I'm playing the harp, and now I'm playing more melodic instruments because I feel like that's the healing that's needed now, or the instruments I'm more drawn to now. But initially, when I was improvising with my voice, I was very much singing in multiple tonalities. So it's interesting that you had that. So I really wanted to talk about that, that sometimes it's like challenging and it's helpful to approach the improvisation not from the classical point of view, but from some other genre first. Even if it's very esoteric and ambient, which is what it was when I started doing it. And now it's becoming much more melodic. So it's like, and rhythmic. So it's like an interesting shift. But in terms of listening to the music I'm feeling called to create is very different. I play a lot of different instruments now. And so it's an interesting unfolding of events with the handpan and the harp and the xylophone and all these other things that I've brought into this space. So if that is helpful in terms of how you approach it.
This is fascinating. So now, I tune to 442, and I always say dress sharp, play sharp. I mean, we tune at 442 at the LA Phil, but now I'm wondering if those trance hip hop beat things I've been playing with, I have no idea what they're set at. I never even thought about it. I just put them on and started improvising, and there was no grind as far as the intonation, which also kind of speaks to maybe I just let that go. And
yeah.
I met myself where I was as far as what I needed to do to create a vibration with that stuff. I don't know. It's interesting to check out. I'm going to bust out my phone later and look at it.
Yeah.
Look, I have so many questions. I don't even know where to start, but let's back up a little bit because you did not start out your life as a sound healer. You were a pianist, an arts administrator. You had a lot of different roles, and none of them had anything to do with sound healing. How did you end up finding yourself working at the LA Phil, and now you're doing this type of work? Was there some sort of through line or transition, or was there a moment that made you realize this was the direction to go in?
Yeah, I'll tell the short version of the story. I talk about parts of it in my book, actually, but the shorter version of the story is that I was always interested in the more esoteric nature of things and music and that, but because of what you said about judgment voices and worrying what people thought and all that kind of thing, I always kind of kept it on the down low. So like, unless people knew me really well, I didn't really talk about it, but it was always there. So I always had this interest in like the healing arts and that. And so it became like kind of more of a hobby and the thing I did when I wasn't working in arts administration. And so I did go to yoga teacher training when I was working at Boozy and Hawks, as a promotions director, and all of the things that I did. So it was like all of my spare time was kind of exploring the realms of spirituality and music and where that connected. And so it wasn't really a new thing. It's just that for a long time, I didn't see it as my profession. I saw it as my hobby. And then it was actually the impetus where it started changing and shifting was actually when my father passed away. And that happened right when I started working at the LA Phil and when you and I met, actually. And that was back in 2007. And so I started this like job that I thought was my dream job. And at the same time, something in me was like, I don't know if this is it now anymore. And something in me just changed because I always felt this draw towards healing and even like felt a call towards it much younger, but I was like, no, I'm going to go this route. And when I got there, I realized in terms of helping people or what my bigger life mission was. And also when you work in music administration, you don't have much time for your own music. And for me, I felt very unfulfilled. I felt fulfilled by many parts of that job, and I loved connecting with the people. I loved listening to the music, but it was so all-encompassing and demanding that I had no space for my own musical creation, and that was clearly the thing that needed to move through. And so I transitioned, and then as I transitioned, I was still doing consulting work and still working in the music industry while I was building my practice and exploring. And I got certified to do body work and craniosacral therapy and built a practice and started, and then it wasn't until actually 2013 that all of a sudden I was like, okay, I had some inkling in 2007 in an experience I had where I had this sense that my work was going to be where music and healing intersected, But at that time, I was still very much in the convention. So I was thinking I would maybe explore music therapy like a friend of mine did and go to school for that and kind of reshift. But then I realized that actually my path was to be a little bit outside of that in a slightly more esoteric way of helping people from a different direction. And, and I incidentally, I actually work at a rehabilitation facility twice a week now, and I do sound therapy with people going through recovery. I have done it with people, I've done it with children that have had various ailments. I've done it with people who are pregnant and going through rites of passage, people getting married, people doing, I've like felt very grateful for the work that I've done, but it just started to take a very different turn and felt much more aligned with what I was really meant to be doing in the bigger picture of things. But it was a gradual process, but definitely the impetus was my father's passing, and then it took a while for each succession, and it was like 2015 where I just let go of pretty much most of the arts admin stuff I was still doing for work, and then I started doing more of the healing stuff full time. And I produced my own events and recordings and concerts and then I wrote my book that you talked about and all of those things. So that was all a big part of it. And so I still teach the arts leadership and entrepreneurship class at USC because I also, well, one, I love it and I really like helping students, but I also feel in a little bit in service, I say, because I feel like they don't always get the perspective of somebody who came from where they are and kind of went this different route successfully. And so I see it as a way to help students and help people in the classical music world that are so focused on that perfectionism thing know that there are options out there. And especially given what happened during the pandemic and where people are, it's this idea that to let them know that it's not always going to be in this very narrow box. There are things you can do outside of that box that are also very successful.
And we'll be right back. I want to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of the Honesty Pill podcast, Yamaha Corporation of America. I've been playing Yamaha equipment for decades in my own practice room, on stage with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, or touring all over the world, and Yamaha has been an absolute game changer. Something I love about Yamaha is the way they pursue excellence in all of their work and at all levels. They are as dedicated to bringing quality work for beginning students as they are for marquee artists. I admire their commitment to continuous improvement and creating a community that includes all of the musicians they serve. Make every note count, play Yamaha. Okay, let's get back to the show. Well, I definitely want to talk about your class at USC in a minute, but I had a music theory teacher who taught microtonal theory and composition. It was like a 32-note scale. And the first day of class, we walked in and sat down, and it was a joke. I signed up for it because it looked like an easy A, and I had to take some kind of an elective anyway. And he said, I want to warn you, when you step into this room and take this class and you work with me for a semester or two, you're going to have your eyes open to things that you didn't know were there. And what's worse, when you step out of this room and back into your quintet rehearsal or your orchestra rehearsal, no one else is going to be aware of what you've learned in here, but you're going to be incredibly aware of the nuances in intonation and like the way you can split that tone into 4 distinct segments. And he said, if you're not willing to carry that responsibility, you should get out of this class right now. And of course, I stuck with it. And to this day, I feel like I have this weird extra sense because I can frame it with the information that he taught me. And I feel like what you teach with sound healing and all these other vibrationally based methods is similar in that you probably, and I'm just guessing, you probably walk around and you can instantly sense a musician, like where their calibration is at. Oh, wow, that person is so out of alignment. Oh, wow, that person seems super at ease because of that awareness. But can I make an observation?
Sure.
I feel like when people hear the words sound healing or cranial sacrotherapy or any of these names, their first reaction is, well, I'm not broken. I don't need to be healed. there's nothing wrong with me. That's like West Side, Malibu, beach house, woo-woo stuff, right? But in reality, and who knows, maybe it is, but in reality, we do need to be aware of that stuff because as musicians, we're so out of alignment with most of what we're doing as far as connectivity. And that's why so many musicians are unsatisfied, or they don't win jobs because they're not connecting to the thing that connects to other people. So they're not actually getting where they want to be. So like, how do you deal with people who instantly would say, well, I don't need sound healing. I don't even know what that is.
Well, first of all, I mean, it's a very layered question. And so I'll start with the first part, which is people's reaction. I honestly come at any kind of healing work I do from the premise that nobody needs fixing, but we all could use more opening.
Oh, I love that.
So it's the premise that ultimately real true healing, yes, there's like acute healing of like an ER or an accident or something, that is one thing. But that kind of emotional healing that we hold stuff in our body is a real thing. And some of it's physiological, but some of it is also emotional. And so a lot of times it's just how you release that is like just sometimes by just having somebody hold the space for you to have permission to be in that space and allow the energy to move through. So that's the basic premise for craniosacral therapy, is that you're using holds, and it's very gentle form of body work where you're holding the bones in a certain way that it literally mimics our memory of being in the womb. And so when that happens, there is this, and this has actually been scientifically proven, that we hold memories in our DNA. And so the way that we hold memories in our DNA is like can be passed down actually from parent to child, where we have this memory that's carried in our cellular structure. And so the idea being that every single memory since we were formed in utero actually lives in our cellular structure. And when you've had a significant trauma or you've had repetitive physical pain or chronic pain or something, it does affect us mentally. So when you're holding that space with craniosacral therapy, it actually is just allowing the body to release and relax in such a way that the nervous system resets itself. Because we're so trained in Western society to just be constantly on the go and constantly doing the thing, that oftentimes our bodies and our brains catch up, like they can't catch up. And so what happens is that we have burnout or depression or anxiety or all these other things that come into play. So the idea is that you're just allowing the space for someone to just be. And the particular way that it's taught, or the way that I was taught to do it, is very much holding space for that so that people can drop into this very deep state of relaxing the nervous system. So it's like a deep state of meditation. And so like that's actually what craniosacral therapy is. So it would be something that is very useful to people that struggle with anxiety or stress, or that it's like the antidote to that. So that's one element with the craniosacral therapy. With the sound healing, I mean, you laugh when you say like, the West Side, Santa Monica, since, I do a lot of sound healing on the West Side in Santa Monica and Malibu. Or you said Malibu too. I've been in some of the beach houses in Malibu. They're really beautiful. So in terms of holding space with sound, it's interesting because I've had a lot of classical musicians actually come to my sound baths, and they've had very interesting experiences, because where you said that about the microtonal world, and I always talk about microtones and explain it to people who are non-musicians, because in sound healing, a lot of the instruments you're dealing in the world of microtones, and especially if you have instruments and some are at 440 and some are at 432, when you play them together, you're in microtone world. But what that does actually is it helps the brain open. It's like, it's literally mimicking brainwave states of relaxation. So what happens when the music is intentional that way is it allows the person to get more out of their head and more in their body and subconscious experience. Because if you even think of it scientifically in the way that we only use 10% of our brain capacity, that's 90% of our brain that we're not using. So to me, it's logical to think that there are other ways of being beyond what is normal to us. And even what you said about the microtonal thing of opening your perception, it's really just about opening your perception to people, to things, to life, to whatever it is that you do. And when you pursue that in any way that resonates with you, because not every tool is going to resonate with every person. It's not possible, right? Certain musics are not going to resonate with everybody. It's just the way that it is. And so you kind of to allow that space to drop in. And I always say, I mean, it's good to have a healthy level of skepticism. But I also find that there are a lot of people I've worked with that they think, oh, well, the energy healing or something is going to be kind of their last resort of healing for something. And when they come, it's just interesting because we live in a quick fix type of society sometimes. And actually, that layer of healing usually takes a little more time. It's not something that you wave a magic wand and it's gone. It's like there's stuff that needs to come up to the surface and be processed emotionally and physically and otherwise. And so it's all a process. Life is a process. It's a journey. It's something that we're stepping into. And so I always say, if people feel called to explore further, then I'm happy to talk to them. And if they feel comfortable where they are, then that's also great.
Yeah, doesn't it take something like 30 days to like reprogram your neural pathways? I saw a great quote or a meme recently, and I'll see if I can get this right. It said something like, today is difficult. Tomorrow is even more difficult, but the day after tomorrow is beautiful. Most people die tomorrow night. And I thought about it in terms of, just about the moment where it's about to get difficult, they're like, this is not for me, and they quit. And they keep repeating those mini cycles without ever getting to the long haul reprogramming of their behaviors, their habits, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's typical of musicians who are dealing with a certain technical problem, for example, or an embouchure or whatever, or audition strategy. They will bail right at the moment where it was about to become totally clear because they didn't wait or hold on long enough.
I agree with you 100%. Because this is so interesting, because when I talk about the principles of healing, and it's interesting because like when I said, when I'm at the rehabilitation clinic, I explain this principle to them, right? Like, because these are people that are actively going through detox, right? And when you actively are going through detox, which is ultimately like where they're going to get better on the other side, there's a part of it where they're going to feel pretty miserable for a while first. Because that's the nature of detox. If you hear people go on a cleanse or a specific diet for a while, there's going to be a while where you're going to have symptoms. If you quit coffee and you've been drinking coffee, you're going to have headaches probably for a few days, right? But the other side, you might feel better. So it's kind of that it's that way across the board. Yeah, at least 30 days. The way that the practice works in terms of when I talk about mantra practice in my book and stuff, it's the idea, it's sort of positive affirmations, which interestingly enough, I think sometimes people hear the word mantra and they're like, oh, it's a religious thing. It is, but it isn't. It's also positive affirmations, which are used through athletics for, they're used in any kind of music practice or something, the positive affirmations or keeping you in that.
I'm glad you brought this up because I have a question that I'm sort of asking for people who may not know, and I think I could use a better definition as well. What is a mantra? And when you said used in sports, I immediately thought of Ted Lasso and that sign he pasted above the door that says "Believe." That's a mantra, right?
Yeah, because it's an affirmation that you're calling in. I mean, when they talk about a mantra, if you say it like how you would pronounce it in Sanskrit, it's mantra.
Okay.
And you flip the R. But what it is that it's words of vibration that carry a certain feeling, a certain emotion and so in Sanskrit, which is like an ancient Indian language, and the mantras that they use are chanted by Tibetan monks, for example. They chant it all day, every day, because the vibration of the words and the syllables, they bring in the energy that they're doing, which in their case is connecting with the divine and connecting with the self and that, right? But the principle of working with the mantras is that all of them carry a different energy. So there are a lot of Sanskrit mantras, and I just recorded one. Actually, it was a trance dance track that I just did based on a Kali mantra, and she's a really powerful goddess known in the Hindu tradition. And so in terms of the mantra itself, it's this idea that you have this word that you're repeating to yourself as that's how you're reprogramming your neurological belief around the thing itself. So now when I work with people privately, I actually go through a whole session where I have a guided meditation I have them listen to first, and then I do a whole hour session, what I call a mantra diagnosis. And I actually go through their whole process and come up with at least 3 possibilities of them to work with this mantra every day. And so if you see, like, I mean, in every major, like I said, again, it's not religion specific when you're doing this practice. This can be anything. And lately, all the mantras people have been working with are in English. And so it's specific to what it is they're calling in, whether it's more of being at peace or a safety or being more expressive in their voice or more expressive in their gifts. And you chant it 108 times a day for 40 days. And that's said to be how the neural pattern resets.
Wait, so let's recap that. And by the way, I was just going to ask you, is it an English word or phrase, or is it just a sound? But I guess it can be either, depending on the context.
It can be either. There's one that I've worked with now that in the translation, it's Ananda Hum. And the translation of that is actually, I am bliss. So then you're in that feeling. So if you have a specific word, you can chant the Sanskrit that means that, or you can just chant, I am bliss.
Let's talk about that 40-day challenge again, because I want to make sure I got that. You said repeat the mantra, which first of all, you have to find out what your mantra is. You have to choose a mantra. Then you want to repeat that mantra. Did you say 180?
108.
108 times every day for 40 days.
Yes, but what you do is that if you've ever seen those beaded necklaces that are the long beaded necklaces, similar to a rosary, right? They're called a mala, M-A-L-A.
Okay.
A mala. And they have exactly 108 beads on it. They're a counter.
So you say the mantra, you move a bead. You say the mantra, you move a bead. When you run out of beads, you're done.
Right, like just for example, like one of the mantras, say, I am confident sharing my gifts. Right? Because you're working on your confidence and like stepping in, and that's your mantra, right? So you'd use it, and each bead would be, I'm confident sharing my gifts, I'm confident sharing my gifts, I'm confident sharing my gifts, I'm confident sharing my gifts. So it goes by pretty fast, actually. You usually do one round in about 5 to 10 minutes, and you do it for the 40 days. But what was interesting when you said about the detox, and this is what I tell people, that sort of gets worse before it gets better, right? Is that in the same way that you go through kind of what I call a purge, right? Like you go through a purge of the toxins, right? Like you're purging the caffeine from your system, and so you get all these side effects, right? So a mantra works similarly. So instead, and this is so bizarre, and you know, anyone can challenge me on this who's skeptical, just try it. And try it while you're skeptical, because that's the best time, actually. You want to pick the thing that you are ready to embrace, but you don't quite believe yet. Right? You don't fully believe it in your system. But what happens is not that you immediately start to feel confident. It's that all of your insecurities come up to the surface to be explored more deeply first, and then you get to the other side. So exactly what you explain in your process, that's actually what happens, which is why I usually work with people for a minimum of 6 weeks, because I want to be with them when they go through the process where all the stuff comes up, because that's where people tend to bail out. Like you said, they want to bail out because they're like, oh, it's too hard. And it's like, no, you're in the home stretch now, because if you actually do it, there's not a single person who's worked with me or people that I know who have done this for 40 days and have not had a major positive shift on the flip side. That's my evidence, right? It's not like science-based evidence. I just know every single person who has done this with the mantra that they're calling in has had a complete life change on the flip side.
This is amazing, Helane. Let me ask you another question as this pertains to meditation. And by the way, listener, if you're still with us in this conversation, high five. And if you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, I don't meditate, I want to throw a challenge out to you right now, which is explore some of this space. And I don't know most of what you know, but I do know that meditation has been this really interesting, bizarre, and frustrating at times tool to sort of have an awareness of what's going on inside my head. I always think of it in terms of You could be on a bullet train with a nice leather chair and fresh squeezed orange juice and the paper, and you're just so calm and you think everything is just going along beautifully. And then you open the window shade and the trees are whipping by 130 miles an hour so fast that you can't even discern what you're seeing. And then suddenly there's like a red light and a sign and a tree and there's a building. And these things are just blipping by in this chaos. I always feel like meditation is me looking out that window. It's not the calm inside. It's me noticing, wow, there is a tornado of thoughts going on in my head right now. And meditation helps me notice that. Does it quiet it? Sometimes. Usually not, I must be honest, but it makes me aware of what's going on. So my question, and there's a question buried in here somewhere, the question is, does the mantra help to sort of bring you back on the rails when you are meditating or holding the space that you keep talking about? When your mind starts to wander, does the mantra bring you back to focus on nothing but that one thing?
It can, yes. And it can also bring up all the voices that are in opposition to the mantra itself. It does both. But as you chant it over time, those voices start to be quiet. And what is nice about that, though, is that the whole premise of meditation, and it's interesting you brought that up, I appreciate you actually asking that question and giving that example, is that a lot of people say, oh, I sit down and meditate and I'm terrible at it. And I'm like, but it's a practice. It's the same way of like, I'm going to pick up a trumpet I've never played before. I'm going to expect to be good right away, right? Like, and be able to master it. Like, I mean, that you're expecting something that's just not possible for anybody. But what you said about being the observer, that is what meditation is for a long time for most anyone that sits down to meditate. There are very few people, unless they're already like born into this lifetime in kind of like a higher level consciousness state, right? That doesn't have this as their practice. So when you sit in meditation, you can focus on the breath and the mantra and sound, especially. That's like sound meditation helps people get there quicker too, because there's an element where it helps to align the brain much more quickly because the sounds help people get out of their head in that space. So absolutely it can help. And the more you sit, the less that those voices will be loud, right? And so you become the observer, and meditation is a skill eventually where as you become the observer, you start to drop more into your body and become aware of whose voices are whose, right? Because a lot of the voices in our head are not ours. Like they're often the voice of our parents or the voice of somebody that was one of our teachers or the voice of the child or the voice of this, instead of it being like, okay, where am I in this whole dilemma and like where these voices come from? And it helps you delineate what the voices are. And the mantra itself will bring the voices to the surface, but it will also help you delineate them.
I guess at some point the voices kind of give up, right? And they're like, well,
Yeah.
this isn't going to work, so we might as well get out of here.
Or you start to have a conversation with the voices, which is more interesting. So you actually, the voices comes up and it's like, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you doing that? And just being like, really? Like, I'm just trying to sit here and be with my breath now. And it wants your attention. Because it's all these thoughts are like vying for your attention. And so when you start to talk to them, I always say it's kind of like you're talking to your inner child voices like you would your child. And you have 2 children, right? Like, so you're not going to talk to your child the way your voice is being mean to yourself in the head, right? Like, I mean, no. So you want to talk to the voices in your head of being like, okay, that could have been better, but I'm going to try again. And when you start to shift it, it's almost like rather than you're getting rid of it or you're letting it go, because I think that's a lot of pressure if you don't sit in meditation regularly, you say like, let me make friends with it. Let's sit on a park bench and have a conversation. Let's have a coffee.
This is amazing. I have 2 questions before I definitely want to talk about your business side of things too, but we have a lot of singers and wind players and people with lungs who listen to this podcast. What would be like a quick exercise they could do right now in the car while they're driving to sort of tap into this sound, humming, the singing part that you alluded to earlier?
Yeah, I mean, one of the easiest things to do is literally to hum. whatever pitch comes out. Just like if you feel, and especially if you're really stressed out or you have anxiety, to just be in your car and just take a deep breath and just and just like, you know, hold the hum as long as you want to. And the other one is just to like breathe in and just like a full bodied sigh. It moves the energy really quickly, especially if you're feeling really stressed out. And if you have a lot of emotion that's moving through your body, and you just like for example, maybe someone just did something that made you really angry and you have to go in and play and you're not really sure what to do with it, scream into a pillow. Super effective.
I've seen a lot of people on the 405 screaming, not into pillows, but maybe they've studied with you. I don't know. Those of you who can't see into Helene's studio like I can, she is literally surrounded with instruments. There's a piano. There's, I guess it's a gong behind you.
It's a gong, yeah.
And then all of these different bowls. Could you just to hear one of these bowls, maybe demonstrate this incredible sound they create and the way you use your voice to hold that space?
Sure. Let's see. Just give me 1 second here.
And while Helene's finding that, I want to just say that I did go to a sound bath at her invitation, and I was like, what is a sound? Should I wear a bathing suit? I don't know what to expect. And it was just, it was like a yoga class, but with vibrations coming from these bowls, and it completely it was super trippy, everybody. I mean, it was incredible, and my brain was seeing all these weird colors, and I was in a very deep state of just relaxation and no stress, no thoughts. Very unique experience. So maybe we'll get a taste of what that's like right now.
All right. So I'll just invite you to take a deep breath in. And let it out.
Oh, thank you so much. Wow, there's no way that the Zoom microphone could possibly give justice to what you just did. So I hope that we all can go download some samples of that on your website or something. And
oh yeah, I have my recordings on Spotify, so you can definitely check them up there.
Oh, all right. We will check it out. All right. This is a perfect, thank you for doing that, by the way. That was such a treat. This is a great segue into a totally different lobe of your brain, perhaps. I just want to talk a little bit about the arts, leadership, and entrepreneurship class that you teach at USC. And I want to give USC a big hug and a high five for the fact that this class even exists, because straight up, when I did my master's at NEC in Boston, there was nothing like this. Nothing to talk about advocacy or using all the skills that we develop as musicians. And I think this is so important that this exists. And I know I've done a visit with your class and was super impressed with what was happening. So what is sort of the high level overview of what you're trying to accomplish with that class?
Well, honestly, it's sort of the same premise as when I work with people with their voices, is because my true intention in all of the work I do is to encourage people to tap into the true power of their own voice, because we all have one, right? It doesn't mean you're meant to be a musician. You know, I work with a lot of people that just really want to sing for themselves. It's not because they want it necessarily as their profession even. And so when I approach this class, it's very much that I want them to tap into what it is that they really want and desire out of their lives as a whole person, not just as what they play or what they do. And so I take them through a whole process, because actually to be an arts leader, like, and I go through the process, what does that really mean, right? Because if your real goal is to lead a major arts institution, which my original goal actually was that, and then I changed my mind the closer I got to it, because I realized that actually what I wanted out of my life was not the reality of what that life was. And at the same time, if someone really wants that, I want to give them all the tools and resources necessary to get there, and tell them the reality that this is what if you choose that, this is the reality of that choice. And if you know that's where you're going and what you want, then that's freaking awesome, because we need people everywhere. But I really challenge them and show them that all the different ways you can be an arts leader. And there are multiple ways of being an arts leader. Where do you fit? And one of the bigger projects they have to do is to create their own arts organization and present it to the class. And some people are close to already making it a nonprofit, and some people are, maybe they don't want to do it for their life, but they're just doing it for the project, which is fine too. But however they let it unfold in the space, I think it's really important that they really know who they are so well, that then they can know how to step into a leadership role. So I'm very big on challenging them, not being hard on them necessarily, but challenging them. If they say something that's a blanket belief, and challenging, well, is that really true? Like, go and research it, get the correct information to give them the resources, so that the truth of being a leader, the first step is to know yourself really well. And then you can step into a leadership role. If you don't know yourself and you step into a leadership role, then you're just kind of regurgitating what everyone's telling you, and you're not really acting as a leader.
You're supporting the premise of the honesty pill, thing that I've created too, which is, if you don't look under the hood first, none of that stuff's going to work. Leadership, performance, being a great colleague, none of it. And I would also challenge anyone who's like, well, I'm not trying to create a huge arts organization. Even if you are a solopreneur or an individual musician looking for a college teaching job or an orchestra job or some sort of performance situation, a lot of the stuff that you probably teach there is similar and necessary to be an advocate for what you do. And I think that's just fabulous that you're bringing that out. What is your biggest challenge doing that work, would you say?
Probably that I only get to work with the students one semester. I would say that's my biggest challenge, because I feel like I really connect with the students and then I never see them again. And I feel the same sometimes in my practice now, and it's something I'm trying to change, because I actually like seeing people's progress over time. And I wish I was teaching there more off, like could see their progress throughout time. And some of them stay in touch and I hear from them, but because I'm not a full-time professor, clearly I do all of the other work that I do as well, which I'm super grateful for. But that's probably my biggest challenge, is that I leave them off into the world and hope that it did what it needed to do. And I'd love to have more connection with them over a longer period of time.
It takes time to build these things, because you're first learning the skills, then you have to learn how to build the thing, then you have to learn how to tell other people about the thing. So there's the construction, there's the marketing of it, and learning how to do that in a not salesy sort of a way, shining your bat signal and illuminating what you're doing. 20 years ago, when you were playing the piano and being an arts administrator, what is one thing you wish you had known then that you know now based on your journey?
That everything's going to be okay. I spent a lot of time in anxiety and worry and that of what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. Am I not going to have any money? Am I not going to do this or whatever? And I think if you are a resourceful person who does the work and shows up, you will figure it out. And it's and I feel like I spent a lot of energy unnecessarily in not the best place and a lot of anxiety, because I was worried about something that might happen that never did.
Worrying is like praying for something you don't want.
Exactly.
If you're not a member of the USC community, how can people work with you and learn these skills?
Absolutely. Anybody that's interested just in exploring more, I offer a 30-minute discovery call with people that you can book online. My website is Sacral Sounds, so SACRALSOUNDS.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Sacral Sounds LA, and send me a DM, or you can just go through my website and find me and send me an email. I'd love to connect. I like connecting with people regardless of whether we work together or not. It's nice to connect with people.
I'll put those links in the show notes for sure. And I have to ask you one last question, which is, if there existed an actual honesty pill that could change one thing about you instantly, could be adding a superpower or taking away a weakness, what would that be?
It's a really good question. I would say remove any latent bits of insecurity that might still be in my space.
That is an excellent choice. I actually hear that a lot when I ask that question, and I would also want that prescription as well. Helane, thank you so much for opening up your studio and sharing. There's way too much information that you have to offer for just a podcast. So I'm grateful we got a glimpse into it. And everybody buy You Are Meant to Sing. You can buy it on Helane's website. I'll put the links to the show notes. I just love the work you're doing, and we need to connect more. It's been too long.
Thanks so much, Chris. It was a pleasure.
All right. We'll talk soon. Thanks. Bye. Big thanks to Helane Anderson for dropping by the podcast today. What an excellent session. So, listener, I'm curious, what was your reaction to all these topics today? We often focus on practice skills or audition strategy or business development here in the Honesty Pill podcast, but I wanted to share some of Helane's excellent work and shake things up a bit, maybe give you some tools to manage your own work-life balance. And I hope you also enjoyed the mini sound bath demo that Helane demonstrated for us. I highly recommend checking out one of Helane's sound healing albums available on her website or on Spotify. They will, at the very least, make your daily car commute a lot less stressful. All right, that is it for me today. This has been the Honesty Pill Podcast, episode 31. As always, you can find out more at honestypill.com. And I want to thank those of you who have taken a moment to review this podcast. It means the world to us and helps other people just like you connect with everything that is going on over here at Honesty Pill Mission Control. And if you haven't subscribed and you like what you're hearing, I want to challenge you to check this item off your to-do list right now by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, I'm out of here. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.